From 1935 to 1944, 11 photographers set out across the nation to explore and document the face of a suffering country. Carrying cameras in an ambition for change, they traveled the United States, capturing 250,000 images of the living conditions and daily lives of impoverished Americans. This undertaking, known as the Farm Security Administration Photography Project, was described as a visual encyclopedia of American life, occurring during the height of the Great Depression through the start of World War II. It was conceived to illustrate the necessity of President Roosevelt's domestic policies aimed at bringing relief and reform to rural Americans. While this project encountered political challenges, it ultimately resulted in the largest visual historical record of the era, documenting a struggling nation and encouraged an exchange of ideas as to how the government could aid its citizens. The stock market crash of 1929 marked the beginning of America's Great Depression, causing widespread panic as approximately 30% of America's workforce found themselves unemployed. As the effects of the economic crisis spread across the country, farmers in the Southwest simultaneously endured the hardships of the Dust Bowl, one of America's largest ecological disasters. The Dust Bowl, which resulted from drought and poor agricultural practices, caused massive dust storms that demolished crops over an area of 150,000 square miles. With growing unemployment and increasing breadlines, newly elected President Franklin Delano Roosevelt began implementing one of the most aggressive domestic policies ever proposed by an American president. Dubbed the New Deal by the press, Roosevelt's policies consisted of new government programs and agencies designed to stimulate and protect the economy while implementing societal reforms. In 1935, Roosevelt created the Resettlement Administration to address rural poverty. However, it was replaced with the Farm Security Administration, or FSA, in 1937. The FSA worked with states and counties to administer low-interest loans made possible by the Bankhead-Jones-Tenet Act to sharecroppers and impoverished farmers so they could buy land and equipment with the goal of becoming self-sustaining. While history would judge the success of the FSA programs as modest, it would be well remembered for its photography program that began with the Resettlement Administration. Roy Stryker, a Columbia economics professor, was hired to head the historical section of the agency, which would oversee the photography program. Roosevelt assigned the historical section to photo-document rural poverty to convince Congress that thousands of dispossessed farm families were in desperate need of government assistance. Stryker wanted the goal of the FSA photography project to go beyond documenting unemployed Americans' dusty farms and long breadlines. He wanted to capture genuine emotion and create an accurate historical record of the era, introduce Americans to America, he said.
Everybody knew there was poverty, but it was an abstraction. Yes, you could see some breadlines, you could read some unemployment statistics, but most of the poor, especially rural poor, were invisible. The idea was to get photographers to make those people visible.
Stryker hired individuals who, through their work with the FSA, would become some of America's most renowned photographers, including Dorothea Lange, famous for her photograph of Florence Thompson, commonly referred to as the Migrant Mother. Walker Evans, known for his collections of rural American farm families, and Gordon Parks, remembered for his portrait of Ella Watson, who is commonly referred to as the face of racism and injustice during the era. The photographers were under strict instruction to not manipulate the scenes they were photographing, knowing this would destroy the credibility of the project. The photographers' use of people in the pictures added an influential and raw emotional aspect that was absent when an image was strictly of a landscape or object. Stryker used this novel composition to his advantage when selecting photographs for program administrators to use when trying to persuade Congress to continue funding many of Roosevelt's programs, often providing photographs of individuals and families to invoke empathy and give a voice to those who could not speak for themselves.
We were all inspired and revved up by the whole New Deal idea, and of changing things and trying to get people to understand what was going on and what the condition of the country was. We were trying to show this graphically because people will look at photographs when they won't read things. They had no idea that a third of the nation was ill-clad and ill-nourished.
In order to create a balanced and accurate portrait of America in the 1930s, Stryker would give his photographers questions to help guide their work, such as, "What do people in small-town Texas do on a Saturday afternoon?" or, "How do people in Mississippi use their porches?" Technical details such as framing, lighting, and camera angles were essential in capturing the emotion and hardship of the people they were documenting.
I remember those photographs were immediately so gripping, photographs that Americans hadn't seen before, not simply because of the subject, but because of the skill of the photographers in penetrating the faces, one could say, the souls of the people who were being photographed.
As a result of the FSA photographers' ability to capture emotional depth in their photographs, popular publications such as Time magazine, Life magazine, and Harper's Weekly began to regularly incorporate the images into their publications, making the photos easily accessible to mainstream Americans.
It is through the exchange of information and ideas that we get a better understanding and sympathy of the other fellow and his problems. I believe the camera can make an important contribution towards this.
One question that surrounds the FSA photography project was whether the project was simply visual documentation, a mirror in which America could reflect upon itself, or did it constitute government propaganda? Propaganda is defined as the systematic dissemination of information, especially in a biased or misleading way, in order to promote a political cause or point of view. The argument that the FSA photographs are mild propaganda holds validity when the intentions of the project are analyzed. This government-funded project was conceived to socially engineer congressional and legislative support to back Roosevelt's domestic policies. Therefore, the project was politically motivated and had intentions of persuasion. However, the counter-argument that the pictures are an acceptable form of government publicity is also legitimate and holds credibility. There are three qualities that set this specific group of photographs apart from iconic government propaganda. First, these photographs captured real, not staged events. Second, the challenges that faced people in the photographs are independent of the photographer, meaning they would have taken place regardless of the presence of the photographer. Third, the photos are an accurate representation of the surroundings. There were no exaggerations.
For Stryker and for many of the photographers, the work was more than simply archival. It was meant to be, and it was, transformative in a nation's will and hope.
Regardless if one views the project as propaganda or awareness, the impact of the FSA photographs on the nation as a whole was nothing less than monumental. The emotion the photos captured was an essential element in Roosevelt's effort to reform and modernize rural America. Legislation, such as the Bankhead-Jones-Tennant Act and the Rural Electrification Act, which brought electricity to the homes of millions of rural Americans, were both results of the FSA photography project.
At the beginning of the Depression, only 1 out of every 9 farms in the country was electrified. At the end of the Roosevelt era, only 1 out of every 9 was not electrified. And I saw that change with my own eyes.
In December of 1941, just days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and America's entrance into World War II, the Farm Security Administration was reassigned to work under the purview of the Office of War Information, or OWI, a wartime agency that oversaw the dissemination of information to the American public. Under the OWI, the FSA photographers shifted their focus from documenting rural America to documenting a country preparing for war. In 1943, Congress voted to cut the photographers' funding and the unit was dissolved. While Stryker had the foresight to release the photographs to the Library of Congress in 1946 for preservation, neither he nor his team of photographers could envision the impact their iconic images would have on documenting an era of great adversity in our nation's history. The FSA's unmatched documentation of a crucial period in American history will serve as a reminder of the unrivaled economic and ecological hardships rural Americans encountered and how the power of photography can influence and reform an entire nation.